Welcome to WWWO Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. In the spring of 1943, the Allied war effort faced a formidable obstacle: the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany, the Ruhr Valley. This sprawling region was the engine of the German war machine, a dense network of coal mines, steelworks, and munitions factories churning out the tools of conquest. Powering this immense industrial complex were several colossal dams, monuments of concrete and engineering that held back millions of tons of water. The Möhne, Eder, and Sorp dams were not merely structures. They were the lifeblood of the Third Reich's industrial might, supplying essential water for steel production and generating the hydroelectric power that kept the factories running day and night. To strike at these dams was to strike at the very heart of the enemy, but they were considered untouchable, fortresses designed to withstand any conventional attack. The Möhne Dam alone was a behemoth, over 130 feet high and 112 feet thick at its base. Thick anti-torpedo nets hung suspended in the reservoirs, ready to foil any underwater assault, while batteries of anti-aircraft guns dotted the surrounding hills, creating a lethal web of flak for any approaching bomber. Conventional bombing had proven woefully inaccurate against such pinpoint targets. High-altitude bombing was a game of chance, with most bombs falling harmlessly into the water or impacting the massive earthen and concrete structures with little effect. A new, radical approach was needed. The strategic planners in Britain knew that if they could somehow rupture these dams, the consequences would be catastrophic for Germany. A torrent of water would surge through the valleys, not only destroying the power stations and factories in its path, but also disrupting the entire regional economy for months. It was a high-risk, high-reward proposition, an operation that seemed to border on the impossible. The question was not only if it could be done, but how. The solution to this impossible problem came from the mind of one of Britain's most brilliant and unconventional thinkers, Barnes Wallis. An aeronautical engineer by trade, Wallis was a visionary who saw problems not as barriers, but as puzzles waiting to be solved. Frustrated by the limitations of conventional weapons, he had been toying with a concept that seemed to defy logic, an idea inspired by the simple act of skipping stones across a pond. He theorized that a specially designed, cylindrical bomb, given a powerful backspin before being dropped from a low altitude, could skip across the surface of a reservoir, leap over the protective torpedo nets, and strike the dam wall directly. Upon impact, the residual momentum would cause the bomb to sink, hugging the face of the dam as it descended. A hydrostatic fuse would then detonate the massive explosive charge at a predetermined depth, using the incompressible power of water itself to direct the blast inward, like a focused sledgehammer. This hydrostatic shock would be far more destructive than a simple air-burst explosion. When Wallis first presented his idea, it was met with widespread skepticism. The concept of a bouncing bomb sounded like something from a work of fiction. Yet, through sheer persistence and meticulous calculation, he proved his theory. Early tests, using marbles and a water tub, graduated to larger-scale experiments that confirmed the physics. The weapon, code-named Upkeep, began to take shape. It was a massive 9,000-pound oil drum-like cylinder packed with Torpex explosive. To work, it had to be delivered with unprecedented precision. Dropped from an exact altitude of 60 feet, at a ground speed of precisely 232 miles per hour, all while the bomb itself was spinning backward at 500 revolutions per minute. It was an engineering challenge of the highest order, creating a weapon that demanded a delivery method as radical as the weapon itself. The question was no longer about physics, but about people. Who could possibly fly a 4-engine heavy bomber with such insane precision, in the dead of night, deep in enemy territory? With the weapon conceived, the mission needed its warriors. In March 1943, a new, top-secret squadron was formed at RAF Scampton. Initially known only as Squadron X, it would soon be given the designation that would become legendary. Number 617 Squadron. This was to be no ordinary unit. Its ranks were filled with aircrew hand-picked from across RAF Bomber Command, volunteers from Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. They were selected for one specific skill, an almost preternatural ability for low-level flying. These were the pilots who felt more comfortable with their wheels brushing the treetops than cruising at high altitude. They were known for their steady hands, cool nerves, and a certain disregard for convention. To lead this band of elite aviators, the RAF chose a 24-year-old veteran with a formidable reputation, Wing Commander Guy Gibson. Already a highly decorated officer with over 170 combat missions to his name, Gibson was a brilliant pilot and a stern, demanding leader. He pushed his men relentlessly, knowing that the mission they were training for left absolutely no margin for error. The training was brutal and shrouded in secrecy. For just 8 weeks, the crews flew punishing sorties over the reservoirs of the English countryside, particularly the Derwent Dam in Derbyshire, which bore a striking resemblance to their German targets. Day after day, night after night, they thundered through the valleys in their heavy Lancaster bombers, practicing the terrifyingly low approach. The mission parameters were unforgiving. They had to master holding a 70,000-pound aircraft steady at exactly 60 feet above the water, an altitude so low their propellers would whip spray from the surface. They had to do this while maintaining a precise speed and course, all in the dark. The crews had no idea what their true target was. They knew only that they were training for a special, one-way, low-level shipping strike. The intense, repetitive training forged them into a cohesive unit, a finely tuned instrument of war, ready to execute one of the most audacious and demanding missions ever conceived. The weapon and the men were ready, but their aircraft was not. The chosen chariot for this mission was the magnificent Avro Lancaster, the backbone of Bomber Command. But a standard Lancaster was completely unsuited for carrying and deploying the bizarre Upkeep mine. A radical and urgent program of modification began. Engineers worked around the clock to transform these heavy bombers into bespoke weapons delivery systems. The most obvious change was the complete removal of the massive bomb bay doors. This left a gaping cavity in the belly of the aircraft, where the 9,000-pound cylindrical mine would be cradled on a special set of V-shaped calipers. To generate the crucial backspin, a hydraulic motor, powered by the aircraft's own systems, was installed to spin the bomb up to 500 RPM before release. The addition of this strange, external payload drastically altered the Lancaster's aerodynamics and weight distribution. To compensate and save weight, much of the aircraft's defensive armor was removed, as was the mid-upper gun turret, leaving the crew more vulnerable to enemy fighters. But the most ingenious modifications were brilliantly simple, low-tech solutions to high-tech problems. Maintaining a constant, dangerously low altitude of 60 feet at night was impossible with the unreliable barometric altimeters of the era. The solution was a stroke of genius. 2 spotlights were mounted on the aircraft's belly, one under the nose and one under the fuselage, angled inward so their beams would converge into a single, perfect circle on the surface of the water when the plane was at the correct height. The pilot simply had to descend until the 2 spots became one. To solve the problem of judging the correct distance from the dam for the bomb release, another simple but effective tool was devised. A simple, triangular piece of wood with 2 prongs was fixed in the bombardier's window. By aligning the prongs with the towers at each end of the dam wall, the bombardier would know the exact moment to release the weapon. These modified bombers, designated Lancaster B Mark III Special Type 464 provisioning, were strange, stripped-down beasts, purpose-built for one single, incredibly dangerous task. The evening of May 16, 1943. A palpable tension hung in the air at RAF Scampton. In the briefing room, 133 young men sat in silence as their target was finally revealed. Maps of the Ruhr dams were unveiled, and the full, audacious scope of Operation Chastise was laid bare. A wave of murmurs and quiet astonishment filled the room. This was not a shipping strike. This was something else entirely. After the briefing, the crews walked out to their waiting Lancasters, shimmering under the evening sky. 19 heavily modified bombers stood ready, each cradling its secret weapon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the deep, guttural roar of 304 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines began to split the air, a symphony of raw power. Led by Guy Gibson in his aircraft, call sign G for George, the first wave of 9 Lancasters thundered down the runway and lifted into the night sky, their strange cylindrical cargo slung beneath them. They were organized into 3 waves, taking 2 different, carefully plotted routes to confuse German air defenses. Their journey was a nerve-shredding ordeal of low-level flying. To stay below enemy radar, they flew nap of the earth, a terrifying flight profile at just 100 feet. They skimmed across the placid North Sea, the moonlight glinting on the water just below their wings. Over the Dutch coast, they dropped even lower, dodging trees, church spires, and high-tension power lines that loomed out of the darkness with terrifying speed. Inside the cockpits, the crews were a study in concentration. The pilot and flight engineer worked in perfect sync, their eyes scanning the instruments and the dark landscape rushing past. The navigator was glued to his maps, calling out course corrections in a steady voice. The gunners scanned the skies, their fingers resting on the triggers of their machine guns, searching for the telltale silhouette of a German night fighter. The journey was perilous. Several aircraft were lost before even reaching the target, either shot down by flak or crashing after hitting power lines in the dark. For the survivors, the real test was yet to come. Shortly after midnight, Gibson's lead formation arrived at their first target, the mighty Möhne Dam. It appeared suddenly out of the darkness, a vast, curving wall of concrete and stone, its towers stark against the moonlit sky. The placid reservoir behind it looked like a sheet of black glass. As they drew closer, the idyllic scene erupted into a volcano of defensive fire. Searchlights stabbed into the night, crisscrossing the sky, trying to lock onto the approaching bombers. The air was instantly filled with the angry red and white streaks of tracer rounds from 20 anti-aircraft cannons positioned on and around the dam. The Germans were ready. Gibson took his Lancaster down for the first attack run. The noise inside the cockpit was deafening. The roar of the engines, the sharp crackle of flak hitting the fuselage, and the steady voice of the bomb aimer calling out instructions. He descended to the prescribed 60 feet, the twin spotlights merging into one on the choppy water. The plane was buffeted by turbulence and shell bursts. He released his bomb, and the crew watched as it skipped perfectly towards the wall before detonating. But the dam held. Another Lancaster, flown by pilot officer Hopgood, went in next. His aircraft was hit by flak on the approach, catching fire. Despite the flames engulfing his wing, Hopgood held his course, determined to deliver his payload. He released his bomb, but it was too late. The damaged aircraft was caught in the blast of its own weapon and disintegrated in a massive fireball. The third attempt, by Flight Lieutenant Martin, was also unsuccessful. His bomb veered off course. It was clear the German defenses were too strong. The gunners were concentrating all their fire on the single attacking aircraft. Witnessing this, Gibson made a split-second, heroic decision. As the next Lancaster, piloted by squadron leader Dinghy, Young, began its attack run, Gibson flew his own aircraft alongside it, turning on his lights and flying parallel to the dam wall, deliberately drawing the enemy's fire. His gunners blazed away at the German positions, creating a vital diversion as Young's aircraft lined up its shot in the relative dark. With Gibson drawing the flak, squadron leader Young and A for Apple had his chance. He brought his Lancaster down to the shimmering water, the spotlights converging perfectly. The bomb aimer's voice was a calm mantra in the storm of noise. Left, left, steady, steady, bomb gone. The crew watched, holding their breath, as the black cylinder spun away from them. It struck the water and began its deadly ballet, one skip, 2, 3, 4 perfect bounces across the moonlit reservoir. It struck the dam wall dead center, then vanished beneath the surface. For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, a colossal, muffled underwater eruption. A huge dome of white water rose silently into the air at the base of the dam, followed by a thunderous roar that echoed through the valley. The dam was still standing. The next pilot, Flight Lieutenant Maltby, lined up for the fifth attack. Again, Gibson flew his diversionary run, his aircraft now riddled with holes. Maltby's run was flawless. The bombs skipped, hit, and sank. Another underwater blast shook the very air. This time, as the water settled, the crews watched in awe. A small crack appeared near the center of the Great Wall. It grew, spiderwebbing across the concrete face. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, the heart of the Möhne Dam disintegrated. A monstrous, unstoppable torrent of water, a 30-foot-high wall of destruction, burst through the breach. 134 million tons of water began its rampage down the valley. From his vantage point above, Gibson calmly keyed his radio and transmitted the prearranged code word for a successful breach back to Group Command in England. N.E., the name of his black Labrador who had been tragically killed just hours before the mission. With the Möhne destroyed, Gibson led the remaining bombers with live mines to the next target, the Eder Dam. Here, nestled in steep hills and shrouded in mist, the attack was even more difficult, requiring a gut-wrenching dive into the valley. But with no anti-aircraft defenses, 3 more bombs were dropped, and soon the Eder II was breached, unleashing another devastating flood. While the first wave of Lancasters achieved spectacular success at the Möhne and Eder dams, another group of pilots faced a fundamentally different and arguably more difficult challenge: the Sorp Dam. Unlike the others, which were concrete gravity dams, the Sorp was a massive earthen dam, a huge pyramid of rock and soil with a concrete core. Wallis's calculations showed that a bouncing bomb would be ineffective against this sloping structure. The attack plan had to be entirely different. The bomb could not be bounced. Instead, the pilot had to fly along the length of the dam's crest at the same terrifyingly low altitude of 60 feet and drop the spinning bomb directly onto the embankment, hoping it would roll down the side and detonate against the concrete core. This maneuver was a supreme test of airmanship. The Sorp Valley was often filled with a thick ground mist, and the surrounding hills made the approach treacherous. The American pilot, Joe McCarthy, flying for Tommy, was the first to attempt it. After a delayed start due to a mechanical issue with his first aircraft, he and his crew finally reached the target. They found the valley shrouded in fog. McCarthy made pass after pass, 10 harrowing attempts to line up his aircraft perfectly along the dam's crest. Each time, the mist or the difficult terrain forced him to abort the run. The strain in the cockpit was immense. On his final, desperate attempt, he found a clear patch and released his weapon. The bomb hit the crest, rolled partway down, and detonated, sending a huge plume of earth and water into the air. But the dam held. It was damaged, its crest crumbled, but it was not breached. Another Lancaster, piloted by Flight Sergeant Brown, also attacked the Sorp, enduring a similarly difficult approach before dropping his bomb. It too caused damage but failed to break the dam. The struggle at the Sorp highlights the incredible, almost impossible level of precision the mission demanded. It underscores that the successes at the Möhne and Eder were not just triumphs of technology, but the result of immense skill and a measure of luck in the face of overwhelming odds and determined defenses. The Sorp would survive the night, a testament to its robust construction and the sheer difficulty of the task assigned to 617 Squadron. In the valleys below the breached Möhne and Eder dams, apocalypse had been unleashed. A churning, debris-filled tidal wave, hundreds of millions of tons of water, thundered through the German countryside with terrifying speed and power. Nothing could stand in its way. The initial wall of water, nearly 33 feet high, swept away everything in its path. 2 hydroelectric power stations were instantly obliterated, plunged into darkness and smashed into ruin. Entire villages vanished beneath the torrent. Bridges, railway lines, and roads were twisted into unrecognizable shapes or simply erased from the map. The floodwaters surged into the industrial heart of the Ruhr, inundating coal mines and flooding the basements of critical armament factories, ruining machinery and halting production. The strategic impact was immediate and significant. For the German war machine, it was a body blow. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, would later write that the raid was a disaster that threatened the entire war effort. The loss of water for cooling and processing, combined with the destruction of the power grid, brought steel and arms production to a grinding halt. It took the Nazis months to repair the damage, diverting thousands of workers from building the Atlantic Wall to the urgent task of rebuilding the dams. This diversion of resources, at a critical time just before the Allied invasions, was perhaps the raid's most important strategic consequence. Back in Britain, the news of the successful raid was a thunderclap of victory. At a time when the war news was often grim, the story of the Dambusters was a massive propaganda triumph. It was a tale of British ingenuity, scientific brilliance, and unparalleled courage. Newspapers ran bold headlines celebrating the heroic airmen of 617 Squadron. The raid demonstrated to the world, and to the Germans, that no target was beyond the reach of the Royal Air Force. It boosted morale on the home front and sent a clear message that the Allies were capable of striking deep into the Reich with devastating precision and creativity. The raid became an instant legend, a symbol of daring and defiance. The morning light of May 17th revealed the staggering price of this victory. As the surviving Lancasters, many battered and riddled with flak damage, limped back to RAF Scampton, the full human cost of Operation Chastise became painfully clear. Of the 19 aircraft that had set out with such high hopes, 8 would never return. Their twisted wreckage lay scattered across the fields and forests of Holland and Germany. 56 of the 133 elite airmen who had taken part were gone. 53 were killed, their young lives extinguished in fire and violence far from home. 3 more were captured, destined to spend the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp. The loss rate was a catastrophic 42%. The elation of success at Scampton was heavily tempered by grief for the empty chairs in the mess hall and the lost friends who would never fly again. Wing Commander Guy Gibson, who had survived the night, would be awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for gallantry, but he would be killed in action just a year later. But the tragedy was not confined to one side. The torrent of water unleashed on the Ruhr Valley brought death and devastation on a horrific scale. While precise figures are difficult to verify, it is estimated that between 1,316 people on the ground were killed in the flooding. These were not just German civilians caught in the deluge. In a deeply tragic and often overlooked aspect of the raid, over 1,000 of the victims were enslaved laborers and prisoners of war, primarily from Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe. They were housed in camps situated on the low-lying ground downstream from the dams. Trapped behind barbed wire with no warning and no means of escape, they were swept away by the floodwaters. This devastating loss of life adds a dark and somber dimension to the Dambusters legend, forcing a difficult reckoning with the brutal realities of total war, where the lines between military targets and civilian populations become tragically blurred. The ultimate price was paid not only by the brave airmen in the skies, but also by the innocent and the captive on the ground below. More than 80 years later, the legacy of Operation Chastise remains as complex and powerful as the floodwaters it unleashed. It is celebrated rightly as one of the most brilliant and daring military operations of the Second World War. It was a stunning confluence of scientific genius, engineering innovation, and human courage. The bouncing bomb, once a seemingly mad idea, proved its devastating effectiveness and revolutionized the concept of precision bombing. The skill and bravery of the 53 men of 617 Squadron who paid the ultimate price, and those who survived, are an enduring testament to the heroism of the Allied air crews. The raid's immediate military and propaganda value is undeniable. It significantly disrupted German war production at a critical phase of the conflict and provided a desperately needed morale boost for the Allies. However, the legacy is also fraught with debate and moral ambiguity. Historians continue to argue whether the strategic gains, which were largely repaired by the Germans within 4 months, truly justified the immense cost. The loss of 53 elite, highly trained airmen and 8 specialist aircraft was a heavy blow to Bomber Command. More pointedly, the catastrophic loss of civilian life, particularly the deaths of over 1,000 enslaved laborers, casts a long and dark shadow over the operation's success. This forces us to confront the brutal calculus of war, where strategic necessity often comes at a terrible human cost. Operation Chastise has since been immortalized in books, documentaries, and the classic 1955 film, The Dambusters, which cemented its legendary status in popular culture. The story continues to inspire awe for its audacity and technical brilliance. Yet, it also serves as a solemn reminder of the multifaceted nature of heroism and the devastating consequences of conflict. It is a story not just of broken dams, but of broken lives, a tale of incredible achievement and profound tragedy, forever etched into the annals of World War II. Thank you for joining WWWO Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.